to discuss this phenomenon of what's going on in the campuses in America and around the world, one of the most interesting people I know and the founder of an incredible organization called Indigenous Bridges, Ateret Violet Schmuel. Welcome to the Quad.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
You know, Ateret, you're like an onion. Every time I speak to you, I discover another layer of your being, which is even more interesting and wild than the layer before. But what I discovered just from a very casual conversation with you a few months ago is that you used to be in the student protest anti-Israel space. Today you live in Jerusalem. And I'm really interested. I love people's journeys. And I really, first of all, want to ask you a little bit to help us uncover or help us understand better that space, and then tell us how you saw the light and got out of it. So first of all, how did you get into that space, and what is that space really about?
So you have a lot of people who really they genuinely believe that what they're doing is improving the world, that they're trying to make the world a better place. You have a lot of people. It's not like a homogenous group. You have a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life who are coming at it from their own perspectives. For me, a lot of my activism was influenced by my Jewishness, by my desire. I grew up in a family that was very secular, very removed from sort of like Jewish identity and history and knowledge and religiosity. But we very much had this idea of like tikkun olam, right? Like to go out and to try and do whatever we could to make the world a better place. And I grew up in a very liberal, very left-wing space, and became even more so. I was very much in the punk scene and the activist scene. And so specifically within the anti-Israel space, I think that a lot of American Jews, especially Ashkenazi Jews, especially secular Jews, and especially Jews that are not really affiliated with Jewish community or Jewish identity, except when it comes to like using it for identity politics, feel like we have an extra obligation because we're given this narrative that we are white European colonialist settlers who have illegally stolen poor brown indigenous Palestinian land and are now committing genocide and apartheid and human rights atrocities. And we should know better because after the Holocaust, after what we experienced, we're now doing this or something even worse to another group of people. We have a moral obligation to own our privilege, to own our voice, and to stand up against the evils that our own people are doing. This is the narrative that's really handed specifically to Jewish students. And so I went into university pretty radical. I was involved in a lot of political activism. I'm what used to be considered extreme left in the United States.
Right.
And for the sake of full disclosure, my ethics have not changed. I still believe in radical equality. I believe in women's rights, in the rights of the LGBTQ community, in religious freedoms. I'm a professional career Indigenous rights advocate. But what has changed drastically is my understanding of what's actually happening after 20 years of boots on the ground, hands-on activism.
But getting back to your time in there, At what point did you start to wake up that this wasn't what you'd been sold?
So it was a process to sort of deprogram. For a lot of students specifically, you have all of these young minds. I went to an Ivy League, one of the most liberal Ivy Leagues there is. I went to Brown, and I studied Middle Eastern history and comparative religion. And we were given these narratives by professors that we sort of viewed as these gurus or gods, And the more actual work that I did on the ground, the more that I saw, the more that of the actual footage of incidences that I saw, and then the way that they were spun, the more my opinions changed on the facts on the ground. And the more involved that I got, the more I realized that so much of the narrative that I was being sold was deeply seeped in anti-Semitic propaganda. Super anti-Semitic propaganda. Like the narrative of who Jews are, right?
So they're separating us from our homeland.
Separating us from our homeland and also putting us in boxes that don't fit us. like you have anti-Semitism both on the right and on the left, right? And it looks different. And so it's very difficult for people to be able to unpack that. Right-wing anti-Semitism is like white supremacy. The Jews are brown, Middle Eastern, foreign, rabble-rousing socialists that will stop at nothing to overthrow the established order. And so they must be gotten rid of so that civility in society can remain. On the left, however, anti-Semitic propaganda is Jews are white, European, colonialist settlers who are illegally occupying poor brown indigenous Palestinian land, committing genocide, apartheid, human rights atrocities, are responsible for wars, kill babies, this, that, and the other thing. And the more you unpack it and the more you understand Jewish history, the more you can see the threads of anti-Semitic propaganda and also blood libel. What we're seeing right now is just recycled blood. It's not even like new or creative.
No.
It's just the same recycled
we're still killing babies.
We're still killing babies.
Yep.
Despite the fact that we have the lowest civilian to combatant casualty ratio in the history of urban warfare.
Facts don't confuse them.
But so the real aha moment for me, like the real moment that really, really woke me up was the Marmara, the Flotilla, because I was very much involved in human rights at that point. I was very, very, very much boots on the ground at that point. And I saw the footage and I saw what led up to it and I saw how it went down. And I also saw how it was spun by the media in a completely different light. And that really shook me to my core, because also at that point, I felt like I didn't have I couldn't speak up for my people, because we had this whole cult of identity politics is very strong. You have to understand that there's like this identity politics and what's now considered intersectionalism, although it is not. It's sort of this metastasized, weird, mutated version of intersectionalism has made it so that there are certain people that are the bad guys and there are certain people that are the good guys. And if Jews are white,
they have to be bad.
Then they're the oppressor.
Yeah.
Right? And so to speak up for the oppressor is to abuse your privilege. Right? It's to join the dark side. And so after years of really being groomed to believe that my people were a part of that, despite the fact that part of my family is Iraqi, so I knew that Jews weren't white, it was really difficult for me to find my voice to advocate on behalf of my own people. I had no problem doing it for other communities, but the Marmara really was the turning point for me when I started really using my platform, using my position and in my community, and speaking up. And the response was actually really shocking for me, because these were people that I'd known for forever, people I considered friends, family even, who just responded with such hate. And that made me sort of unpack it even more. But that was the real turning point for me.
I wonder if if you're out there, when you walk onto college campuses today, there are not a small number of even kippot and other Jewish kids. You must be seeing quite a number of younger versions of yourself.
Yeah.
What do you tell those students? What would you, if you had the opportunity, what do you tell those students?
So I think what I would tell these young campus activists is that their hearts are good. For sure, their hearts are good. They're in the right place. Their intentions are good. But they have to really be able to unpack the propaganda and the narratives that they're being sold, because they are wrong, and and it's not their fault, right? It's not their fault that they've been given these narratives. It's not their fault that they've been educated in a system that's been bought by Qatar and Iran.
Right.
The American education system has literally been purchased over the last 20 years by Islamist, colonialist money, in order specifically to change the American education system. And so having these young students going into the system who don't have enough information about who they actually are to begin with. They don't know their own history. They don't know their own identity. They don't know their family stories. They don't know the Jewish connection to Israel. They don't understand what Jews are or what Judaism is. And their whole experience is sort of like, bagels and Seinfeld. They don't really have the background to be able to sort of push back against these narratives that they're given. And it's not their fault. It's really not their fault.
What's the solution here? Is the solution, Stephanie, for example, has a program to bring kids to Israel to study full degrees here. I'm also working on a similar project to make it wider spread. Is the solution to bring undergrads to Israel, or where do you see the solutions?
So I think that that's definitely a part of it. I think once people come and see this land for themselves and are able to understand that it's like that the accusations of apartheid are hilarious, like they're so ridiculous, it's very clear.
Sure.
That helps sort of deprogram it. I think another thing that's really important and that we've been working on for many years now is being able to shift the dialogue, being able to shift the conversation, because Jews really are an indigenous people. And I don't think Jews know to speak, like in generally speaking, Jews don't really see ourselves in that language because
they don't.
No, because that's not how we identify as ourselves.
Well, I think that's part of the Ashkenomity.
Yes.
Right?
Ashkenomity.
Whether you don't, people who are Sephardi see themselves more from the region. They look a little bit more from the region. Right. And I think it's harder, especially when they've had zero Jewish education, to make that connection.
Right.
I would even add an additional point to what you're saying, which is that because of their lack of Jewish education, a real Jewish or Zionist identity, the only thing they ever can connect to, which is their past, is a Holocaust identity.
Yes.
Right.
It's what their grandparents or great-grandparents went through, and that just spells victimhood and something they want to stay as far away from as possible.
On the contrary.
They don't have anything to really connect to in a positive way.
So I think if we're specifically talking about far left wing, like Anglo and English speaking Jews, things like birthright are not going to appeal to them. It's too mainstream. It's too Zionistic. Like I still, even 20 years in, I still like don't speak about myself in terms of Zionism, despite the fact that I now very openly explain that Zionism is in fact a successful land back movement. It's a successful indigenous land reclamation.
Decolonization project.
It is decolonization. However, Zionism for most of these kids, and for me, was a term that was interchangeable with fascist.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was a term that we used as a curse and a swear.
Yeah.
So you have to understand that to hear, like for most of these kids, that birthright and APAC and all of that is in this package together of like the bad Jews. Yeah. And if you're a good Jew, you don't mess with that. So we have to create new programming that's actually appealing and that actually speaks to what they're interested in. So one of the things that I found really helpful is helping Jews sort of A, understand their identity, and B, reframe it in terms of indigeneity. And Jews, when we're able to understand that, in fact, no, we're not the bad guys, we're not these white European colonists, we're in fact the indigenous people that were colonized, and we fought back, and we regained sovereignty, and we regained some of our traditional lands, and we were successful in doing that, and we did so ethically. Like if we really, these people's hearts are soft, right? They care, they really care. They may have been indoctrinated with a very sneaky and conniving narrative that paints all things Jewish and all things Israeli as evil and bad and oppressive and occupiers. But I didn't understand that you didn't have to openly hate Jews to be an anti-Semite. You just had to take in, internalize, and spread anti-Semitic propaganda, or propaganda that spins Jews in Israel in a light that elicits a negative reaction from other people that's not true.
They've been used as tools. We have to wrap up now.
Okay.
What would be your one message if you look in the camera and you could talk to any of these kids? Not that they'd be watching, but you never know. Maybe a concerned parent is watching. What would maybe you tell a concerned parent that has seen their kids get completely indoctrinated by this type of self-hatred, hatred of Israel, hatred of Zionism?
Or embarrassment.
Embarrassment. Look in the camera. What would you say to them?
You're a good person, first and foremost. That's the most important thing to understand. Even good people are given really bad information. Colonialist propaganda is extremely powerful. There's an enormous amount of money and time and energy and resources that is being directed specifically at convincing you of something that's not true about yourself, because people want to tokenize you and use you to legitimize and validate their own hatred of our people. And it's not your fault that you have taken this in. I highly encourage you to actually come and actually see Israel for yourself and see how false these narratives are about our people, about our land, I will even host you myself. I will host you. I will feed you. I will take you around.
Really will.
I really will. If you're able to actually do the work to unpack that and the inherent biases of the people giving you that information, you will find that it's not as it's been sold to you. And I really encourage you to try and do that work because it's important. And we're actually, generally speaking, when things go down, Jews are the canary in the coal mine. We're the first to feel the effects of something really horrible happening. It usually starts with us, but it doesn't end with us. And so if you actually really genuinely care about the fates of people around the world, Indigenous people, minority groups, marginalized groups, the LGBTQ community, we're at the very edge of that. And us being able to understand who we are and to be able to stop the propaganda from getting farther will actually do an enormous amount to protect other minority groups as well. So keep that in mind.
Ateret Schmuel, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.